Okay, I think this thing is on now. Oh my, hello. Hopefully this is working. I had a little trouble getting it started, but I think Butter's going to take a nap now because he doesn't like to sit here while I talk this much. Yeah, you can go over there. Okay. So I have the last part of the deposition transcript from Justin Baldoni's deposition that I'm going to go over with you guys this afternoon. This is all from Stephanie Jones' attorneys. We went through all the stuff from Lively's attorney in a couple of parts earlier this week. So I'm going to finish with this part here. I'm going to put up this banner, okay, just while we read this first part here, because I'm going to start with the stuff that I put in the headline of the stream, and then we'll go to the top. Give me 1 second right now. Okay. Also, I will try to keep the face cam on while I'm doing this today, but I have been having some allergies, and if I'm just going to be sitting here wiping my nose a bunch, I will probably turn it off at some point. But you'll still be able to hear me, so it's fine. You good back there? Okay. I'm just giving people a couple minutes to filter in here. So this part of the deposition that we're going to start with, that I want to get to right away, is where the attorney kind of starts trying to turn this into something like political. A lot of the questions from Stephanie Jones' attorney are breaking down the relationship between, Justin and Melissa Nathan, Tag PR, Jed Wallace, Jen Abel, like what he understood them to be doing, what he was aware of, that kind of thing. And the attorney seems to bring up this kind of MAGA hero vibe to, question that relationship or say, are you basically aware that your PR team might be feeding this narrative, which, I don't know if that's true or not. That's just what they're trying to get at. So I will be starting with that part. I'm not a political channel, so let's keep in mind here, please, respectfully, that I am not giving an opinion one way or another on any type of political issue. I can't stop people from fighting about politics. If you're going to disagree about something political, please do so respectfully. Don't be inflammatory. Everybody can get along here. But this isn't going to be like a political discussion. It just happens to be something that was brought up in this transcript that I'm going to be going through. So let's, let me pull that up. Okay. Like I said, we're going to start with this section, then we'll move back up to the top. I'm not going to read every page word for word. That would be ridiculous and take forever, but we will go through the highlights of it. 1 sec. Hold up. Okay. So she starts asking about the Man Enough, the podcast or the book. And he's kind of getting into the background of that and what that was all about. Says, what is the conception behind the Man Enough podcast in your words? He says, the Man Enough podcast was originally going to be an accompanying podcast to a book that I had released years ago called Man Enough. That book was about my own journey to redefine and undefine what masculinity was for myself. And then they ask him to describe like the book or his journey or whatever. And he says, the book was really a self-exploration of looking at all the unconscious messages that I've taken on as a man, but more importantly, as human in my life, all the mistakes I've made, the social constructs and kind of invisible scripts that I maybe have been living by that I wasn't even aware of, and putting them in a form that I was hopeful could help other men. And unfortunately, we've seen now people take bits and pieces of that in this case and try to use it against him, which is unfortunate. And the podcast, I think, was, to answer your question, was a way to have a conversation around those same topics that oftentimes were uncomfortable so that we could have something for men outside of the book. Okay. They said, did the book or the podcast deal with notions of toxic masculinity? Was that part of it? Justin says, I actually wrote in the book that I don't like to use that phrase, toxic masculinity, so I will answer your question. No. Whoops. I hit a button there. Hang on. There we go. So I'll answer your question, no, but I think that would be more of a perception based on who was listening. As I wrote about, I think that the phrase toxic masculinity was inherently divisive. I believed it became political, and a lot of men felt attacked by the use of the word, And I didn't feel that it made any sense to use a term that would immediately make men defensive, especially because those were the very men that I wanted to reach. And I also don't believe that masculinity is inherently toxic. I never have. I was very proud to be a man. I never felt like I needed to apologize for being a man. And I know that was something that was going around a lot with the phrase toxic masculinity. And that said, there were a lot of people that maybe kind of lumped in this idea that because I was doing a podcast and writing a book about masculinity, that I was saying that masculinity was toxic. But generally, those were people that didn't read my book or listen to the podcast, which is definitely true. I just wanted to help men and help men embrace all the parts of them that made them human. And that also means the stuff that sucks and that you never want to look at and that maybe you've been hiding or you don't even realize you're hiding. And it was just about confronting those parts of ourselves and just holding ourselves accountable to try to be better men. He says, I'm sorry, that wasn't very brief. And that's true. It was not very brief. 1 second. Happy birthday, Laura. Laura's one of our mods here. Hope it's a good one. Teresa, thanks for gifting the membership. I appreciate you. All right, 1 sec. Okay. When you said the stuff that sucks that you never want to look at, or maybe you've been hiding or you don't even realize you've been hiding, can you give me some examples of what kind of stuff you're talking about? He says, sure, I mean, a lot of men deal with shame. A lot of men, suicide among men is increasing yearly, and many more men take their own lives than women. And there's a belief in, and I don't say this as an expert, this is just from my own research and experience, there's a belief in the specific world that this happens because men don't have a support system, because men have been taught not to share their pain and their trauma, because it's oftentimes used against them and weaponized against them by both men and women. So an example could be a man that was abused as a child who never spoke to anybody about it. In this case, I'll give you an example of a man that was maybe accused by an older man, but this man identifies as being heterosexual. But because he was abused by an older man, struggles with the abuse itself and being taken advantage of. But also the fact that he was abused by a man, he's also questioning his sexuality or his gender. And there's a preconceived notion that as a man, you don't want to go to therapy because it makes you less of a man. So perhaps this man didn't get the help that he needed, and he was, as we say, suffering in silence. And he didn't know who to reach out to. And instead, that man took out all of these feelings of shame and unworthiness and confusion about what happened to him and blamed himself and would take that out on other people. Maybe other men, maybe other women, maybe this man himself became an abuser. Okay. And the whole idea is that this is something that as a man you would find embarrassing and shameful because it's not something that is socially accepted or acceptable to talk about. So the hope was to normalize getting the help you need to normalize vulnerability. Let men know that they're not alone, and that there is all kinds of examples of these types of things. I'm happy to name another one if you want me to. And again, this is just a hypothetical man. And many of these men end up eventually taking their own lives. And that breaks my heart and hurting women in the process, which also breaks my heart. Okay, the attorney asked, did any of your work on the podcast or in this book around this idea of man enough have to do with gender norms or gender relations as between men and women? Justin says, I think the entire book was inherently about gender and masculinity specifically, but as I said in the book, I'm not an expert, and the book was much more my personal journey in trying to use as many anecdotes and stories that I could find in my life to point men to a direction of maybe them being able to look at themselves. I'm sure some of that was discussed either on the podcast or in the book, as this is a large conversation, and my book was meant to be just a tiny little piece of a personal journey meant mostly for men, but as we know, many women read it and then gave it to their men. Okay. The attorney asked, have you seen reporting around you that identifies you as an ally of women or a feminist ally? He says, I would say so, yeah. Do you believe yourself to be an ally of women or a feminist ally? Justin says, I certainly have attempted to be. Okay. You're aware of the Me Too movement, I'm assuming. I am. And then he asks, the attorney asked, are you aware of an idea that came out of the Me Too movement that one should believe women, both believe women when they speak out about misconduct against them? He says, yes, I'm aware. Do you agree with that idea? Which, of course, is a complicated thing for him to answer now because he's always been kind of outspoken about that kind of stuff. And then, of course, somebody accused him of stuff that he says that he didn't do. Okay. Oh no, it's not my birthday. It's Laura's birthday. But yeah. Let's see. Justin says, I think that's a very nuanced question that I can't give you a yes or no answer to. Are you aware of something called the He Too movement? No, but I could imagine what it is. The attorney says it's essentially a response to the Me Too movement about men who believe they've been falsely accused by women of misconduct. Justin says, oh, then no, I don't know. I don't know what that is. Okay. I actually thought it was like him too, like he has been sexually harassed or sexually assaulted also. Because oftentimes people think men can't be sexually harassed or assaulted and think it's only women. But I think that if we're talking about equality, it's important to create room for men to be able to share their experience of sexual harassment or assault. Because I believe 1 in 5 men have been sexually assaulted, which is a pretty big number. But again, not as an expert, just something that I've read. So that's what I thought you were meaning about him too. Okay. The attorney says, are you aware of or have you been following a lot of the commentary about you on social media since this lawsuit began in general? Justin says, I've had very long breaks where I didn't, and then there have been times I feel like I need to know what's happening, and I go, look, unfortunately, people don't necessarily respect boundaries, and people send me lots of things, so I have to constantly ask people not to send me things, but there have been many months where I have not been following, and there's been months where I have. Okay. Have you seen that online, at least, you become in certain circles kind of a hero or a figurehead of the MAGA movement? And I think we all know what the MAGA movement is, you know, Make America Great Again, the Trump slogan. I don't agree that he's been painted as a, well, let's put it this way. I believe that some mainstream media headlines have tried to politicize things and put him in a box where he is a figurehead of the MAGA movement. But if you actually look at what's happening, it doesn't really seem to be true at all. It just doesn't line up for me. I know they keep trying to make this a thing, but it's just not. But Justin says, no, I don't mean to laugh, but no, I didn't know where you were going with that, but I didn't think you were going with that. Okay. The attorney says, I'm not going to ask you about your political affiliation. Justin says, I don't have a red hat. I don't have a red hat. Like, no, I'm not a MAGA. I don't have a red hat, but okay. She says, I'm not going to ask about your political affiliation. That's what Justin says. He says, I don't have a red hat. And then Justin's attorney chimes in and says, well, you've asked about everything else. So Justin says, is that true? That's all right. You just surprised me there. So he's asking, is it true that I'm a MAGA figurehead? Like, he doesn't even know. He doesn't know what that is. So these people like don't seem very political at all. And I believe... like, and I can't speak too much to the Baha'i faith because I don't know too much about it. I know the basic kind of principles, but they seem as a collective to be very like non-political. Like they don't really have a standard political affiliation or like a popular political affiliation. You know what I mean? They're just not very political people. So the way he's responding to these questions actually makes a lot of sense to me. Again, this is not my feelings about MAGA. I'm not commenting on any political positions here today. I'm just reading the document, right? Okay. And then the attorney asks, so you've not seen the legions of MAGA supporters who have come out in support of you on social media? Justin says, no. That's very surprising. And I don't know about you guys, but I actually haven't seen anything like that at all either. So that's kind of strange. And you're not aware that you have a very pro-MAGA fan base on social media. Justin says, you're making me aware. Are these like the Make America Great Again red hat people? The attorney says, that's what I mean. Yes. Justin says, is there anything you want to show me? She says, not right now. No, I just didn't know if you had been following this during the course of this lawsuit. Are you aware that on social media, you've also become to some like a poster boy for the He Too movement? Justin says, as I said, I wasn't aware of what He Too meant. And again, this is just me personally. I have not seen anything like this that's painting him as a poster boy for these things. I think this seems kind of random, like they fixate on a certain corner of social media or something. But as in a general sense, no, I haven't gotten that at all. I think there's lots of different political opinions amongst the people who follow this stuff. So someone made a connection because Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly have made comments and were also subpoenaed by Blake. That's why he's a MAGA. Yeah, no, because there's lots of like liberal commentators who talk about this stuff as well. I think that they do have big audiences, yes, but like, so what? If somebody who was super conservative came out and started talking about, Blake's case, would they then, like, from a pro Blake standpoint, would they then make that connection between her and the MAGA movement? I don't, this seems kind of weird and pointed and intentional, but whatever. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, I don't get that vibe at all, but whatever. Baha'is do not get involved in party politics. I'm reading a comment here. Baha'is do not get involved in party politics because it's counter to the purpose of the faith, which is to unify people. It's impossible to foster unity if you're picking sides, right? So, I mean, that's a way better way of putting it than I did. Yeah. Okay. All right. So back to this. Justin is saying, was I aware that I was a poster boy for the He Too movement? As I said, I didn't know. I thought He Too meant something else. Okay. Right. Other than the term He Too, are you aware that during the course of a lawsuit, you've become kind of a hero or poster boy for this idea of men being falsely accused by women? Justin says, no, hero is a very strong word. Okay. And then Justin's attorney chimes in and says, looks like you're on your last page. You don't have to use all 7 hours, Stephanie Jones' attorney says, do you know what the Manosphere is, if I use that word? Justin says, that one I do know. The Manosphere, to my understanding, it was like an alt-right movement that took place on or in parts of the web, which I don't know, maybe Reddit or some places that kind of bred this idea that men are victims and created, I don't know the exact term, but like these cells of men who would take out their anger on women. The attorney asks, are you aware that during the course of these lawsuits, you've also become kind of a hero to the Manosphere, which I've never even seen. Lauren, have never even seen anything like that. Justin says, I'm learning all kinds of new things today, so thank you. Okay. Let's see. Justin says, no, I don't know where the Manosphere is, nor do I know where to find that information. But I hope that people in the Manosphere, if they do think of me as a hero, would then go read my book, because I think that could then maybe, I always wanted to get the book into the Manosphere because this is a weird way to do it. And I don't mean that like as a joke. That was always a thing that we had talked about, is how do we reach the men in the Manosphere? So maybe God is laughing right now. The attorney says, is the Manosphere a movement that you want to be associated with? Justin says, I think I just answered your question. No, I'm not meaning to laugh at you. It's just, no, absolutely not. Like I said, I absolutely would want them to read my books and give my book for boys to their young boys, because all of my work is about helping men actually do the opposite of my understanding of what the Manosphere is, which is to not take your anger and aggression out that you have in the world out onto women and the women in your life, and to go to therapy and to not harbor that anger and the resentment and to get it out of your body. And to, so maybe some good will come out of this if they are reading my stuff. Yeah, so they picked like the person who is the most opposite of the Manosphere people in the world. And they're like, by the way, do you know you're like a Manosphere hero? He's like, what are you talking about? So. Okay. Where's the Manosphere? I don't fucking know either. All right. Do you know whether during the course of the lawsuit, anyone on your team has been stoking these constituencies, I can talk, oh my God, in your favor on social media? Justin says, wait, hang on. Ms. Shapiro, the attorney for Justin, says, I'm going to instruct you not to provide any information based on what your lawyers have communicated to you. He says, that's okay. My lawyers haven't told me anything. I didn't know anything about it. Okay. The question here is, you're not aware one way or another whether anyone on your team has been stoking these constituencies, I hate that word, man, that I've mentioned in your favor on social media. Justin says, I don't know where I'd even find the Manosphere, so no. Then the attorney asked, do you think Jed Wallace can find the Manosphere? Because these people think that Jed Wallace is some kind of shadow demon, which is interesting. Okay. One of the attorneys chimes in, says, we got 6 hours and 45 minutes. If you have real questions, ask them, but this is silly. Hold on. Justin still says he has no idea. All right. Okay. Ms. Shaw, the attorney, says 1 defendant per deposition, please. I guess like one of the other defendants' attorneys spoke up. It must have been Jed's at that point, I would assume, but I'm not positive. And then the attorney comes back in and says 1 defendant, but 1 person sitting here late at night wondering what you're doing here at this point. You're just improvising. Well, I guess that's true. Okay. Justin says, I'm happy to answer your question. I don't know anything about what Jed Wallace knows or where he could find the Manosphere. The attorney asks, what do you know about what Jed Wallace does? He says, I know he's very good at compiling information and sending it, as I believe I testified to earlier. I know he can help. I've had people call me and like threaten, leave me threats. I've had death threats. So I know that he knows people in security. So he was able to get me security. I know that he loves his family a lot. I know that he had a health scare, but I don't know much about what he does or what he can do. Okay. They ask if he's read Stephanie Jones' lawsuit in this case, and Justin says, I haven't. And that's the end of it. So we're going to go back to the top and we'll go through the highlights there, but I wanted to get to that part first. So the obviously really shitty part about this here, where he's talking about the threats that he's been getting and how Jed had to help him get security, is of course that when Blake leaked this and left it on the public docket for like 15 or 16 hours, she leaked his brand new home address after he just moved, like full home address and everything, to the entire public. Of course, I crossed that out. I'm not going to be sharing that at all. And the reason I haven't, even shared a copy of it is because I know that there's some workarounds you can do with redactions and PDFs. And I'm like, I don't know how to make sure nobody can get around it. So I'm not going to share it just to have like a bad actor come in and do like the copy paste thing and find the address. Like that's not something that I want. So, because people have been asking me a lot, and I'm like, until and unless I can figure out how to absolutely like lock it down so nobody could get past or like get rid of my blocking that out, I don't want to do that. Okay, give me 1 second while I scroll back up to the top. Yeah, so they had like highlighted it and everything. So this was clearly the portion with confidential information that they were supposed to black out. And then they just put it out there anyways for no apparent reason. So none of this stuff was really supposed to get out. By the time, they took it down, it had been on the internet all day, like being passed around, screenshots everywhere. So it's kind of like, what's the point of, at this point, not looking at it? So I just decided to block it out and read the thing. Because it was going to come out. It looks like they agreed to like unsealing that. The only thing they wanted to keep confidential was the addresses. But then, they went ahead and put it all out there as is anyways, which it looks like the rest of it, as we've been reading it, is stuff that would have come up on the public docket eventually. But that doesn't make it any better that they put it out the way they did and when they did. So they were supposed to wait for the judge to rule on certain things. So, okay. So remember, this is Stephanie Jones' attorney asking the questions here. I've cut out portions that aren't really telling us any new information or portions that we've read in exhibits before. I've tried to skip over a lot of that stuff so it's not too repetitive. And so we're not sitting here for 4 hours because that would be terrible. Okay, so they ask about his relationship with Jen Abel, who's currently his publicist. She was also the main person who worked with him while JonesWorks was their publicist. So Stephanie Jones, of course, owns JonesWorks, but she wasn't like the personal publicist for Justin Baldoni. She had other higher profile clients that she would work with directly, but Jennifer Abel was the one who was really handling Justin's account. So it's just, it's like he knew Stephanie, he could call Stephanie and talk to her sometimes, is basically the gist of what we're going to get here. But Jen was the person who's really handled his business and somebody that he considered a friend. So, they ask, about his relationship with Melissa Nathan. He says she's friendly. We don't know each other very well. Like everyone else, I think the bond of being in the situation brought them closer, but they're friendly. Okay. And some of this I'm not going to read word for word like the responses. I'm just going to summarize it like I just did, because honestly, if I sat here and read line for line the question and answer, it would drive me insane. I don't think that's really going to be helpful for anyone. So let's see. Get some water real quick. I think we can take that banner down since we're done with the MAGA hero stuff. Michelle Campbell, thank you for the $20 watching behind a bit. Newsflash to these morons, a large percent of women have been abused/harassed, and 50% of the country voted MAGA. How would there not be some overlap? Of course, some of us support Baldoni, so dumb. Man, I don't know. Like I said, I don't think this is a political issue at all, so I tend to not bring politics into it. If they didn't ask about it in the deposition, I would not have even really brought it up. So I don't play the politic thing on YouTube. This is not a political channel, so I just want to say everybody's welcome here. I'm not gonna, be like, you'll get out, So, but yeah, no, you're right. Of course, there's going to be some overlap with any political party on like pretty much any issue. You know what I mean? So, the reason I don't talk about politics on YouTube so much is it's like the one thing where like everybody has opinions on politics. Everybody, right? And because of that, there's, just naturally a larger population of radicalized people on every side of every single issue, no matter what. There's always going to be radicalized people. And people, when it comes to politics, tend to, within that pool of radicalized people on both sides of every issue or every side of every issue, some of them get violent and threatening. And, I don't hide my identity. I use my real name. I've talked about my life and kind of generally where I live. I've shown my family. So I don't really want someone to come find my house and set me on fire because they didn't like a political opinion. So very, very, very rarely will you hear me talk about politics. If I did, I would make a separate channel and it would be faceless. I thought about it, but I don't know. So we'll see. Anyways, let me just get into this stuff. Okay, this here I highlighted. He's describing how they got certain information from him. He says, I had to hand over my phone multiple times. I think they're called like data scientists. That's what I can remember right now. There were, I think I had looked through for various emails. I don't remember the content to just make sure that people had everything, or text that people had everything they needed. So I just wanted to highlight that part because some people have raised issues where they were afraid that, like people could just, when they're compelled to produce evidence, they could just leave stuff out or delete stuff and be like, well, we don't trust that they don't delete stuff. I'm like, well, that's not exactly how that goes. They have to actually turn over their devices to people like specialists who then get that information. So even deleted stuff from phones and computers, etc., can be extracted through certain programs. These days, in this day and age, it's like almost impossible to really delete stuff, on a lot of fronts, like text messages, phone call history, search history on your computer, that kind of stuff. So I think that might put some people at ease just to know that these people, all of them, when they're having to turn in their text messages and communications, they have to do that through a certain process. So it doesn't matter if they deleted certain messages, those things will come out. Yeah. Okay. All right. So they talk again about this, how he recorded some things, and he talks about that one improv acting session between him and Jenny and Blake that he had recorded. This was apparently a Zoom recording. They at one point said, and you tried to use that as like, well, we were uncomfortable. We didn't know we were being recorded. But if you're doing a Zoom meeting with somebody and they're recording the meeting, you actually have to click through prompts that inform you that it's being recorded. So that was absolutely not the case. I don't know why they even tried with that, but they just mentioned that there. So I wanted to point that out. Okay. They talk a little bit more about things that he's recorded. So here's his description of a phone call with Angie Giannetti, who works for Sony. And again, I don't know if it's pronounced Ange or Angie. I mean, no disrespect. I just don't know. He says, what I recall is feeling scared and almost feeling like what was happening was like I needed a witness, because what was happening was just it felt kind of crazy, but I don't remember the content of the call. I assume it had to do with figuring out how to get through a difficult shoot. Okay. They ask, what was it at the time that felt kind of crazy to you? He says, I don't know exactly what call or when it was recorded, so I don't know if I can answer that without more details. Do you have a memory of a call that you recorded? with Angie G and Neidigh. Okay, so this was also Angie G and Neidigh. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. So they're still talking about Angie. With respect to that call, do you have a vague memory of, do you have any recollection of why you recorded the call? He says, I think I felt powerless and scared and kind of lonely, I think. What did you intend to do with the recording? He says, nothing. I didn't know if I would ever need it one day. They asked, have you needed it? And he says, I haven't looked at it or listened to it, so apparently not. Okay. Did you tell her you were recording the call? He says, I didn't. And apparently between Justin and Jamie, at least, there were like a couple of phone calls that were recorded. Jamie recorded at least one phone call with Stephanie Jones, and they didn't inform them that they were recording. People have, kind of talked about why that's important, or, two-party consent states and that kind of stuff. But I don't know the rules for each state, and I especially don't know when it comes to business calls if there's any like expectation of, privacy in certain situations and that kind of thing. So I can't really speak to that, but they were asking him about it. So, okay. Did I hear that right? Blake was also in the practice recording with Jenny Slate. Yes, that's correct. It was Justin Blake and Jenny Slate. So, one sec, guys. Okay. So now he's talking about a call with Sean Levy. They said, who is that? Sean Levy is a director and apparently a very close friend of Miss Lively and Ryan Reynolds. I recall he wanted to speak to me, and as we began talking, I got the feeling that he was calling to kind of adjust course correct, which made me feel a little uncomfortable. I felt like he was being asked to call me, like he wasn't just calling to talk or check in. He was calling apparently about the movie It Ends With Us and Miss Lively. They asked if he was calling about the tensions that were arising. Justin says no. Okay. He answers he was calling to give me advice, it appeared, on how to handle or navigate making a movie with Miss Lively. Well, I would think anyone would need some advice in that regard, but they ask him a lot of questions about stuff regarding like Jamie Heath. Like here they asked, does Jamie Heath often record phone calls to your understanding? He's like, I'm unaware what Jamie does on his own time. A lot of this deposition, and even in the next one where Blake's attorneys were questioning him, they're asking questions. He's like, I don't know. Those are Jamie's decisions. I don't know. Those are Jamie's decisions. So lots of stuff like that. But, right, let's see. Okay. Here he's saying he's aware that Jamie had recorded a phone call with WME or an agent. Let's see. So at that time that he's saying, at the time of that recording, and the thing that Jamie was recording is that they were talking about how Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively were apparently threatening them. Apparently someone from WME was, on the call, like I said. It was apparently his former agent, and also Jennifer Abel. Justin says there may have been assistance on the WME side. He's not sure. And what was your understanding? What was your understanding of that call, that it was a call between Jamie and Danny? He says, I actually don't know much about the call. Okay. To your understanding, how were you being threatened at the time by Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds? Justin answers, my understanding was that there were demands being made that I release some sort of public statement that had been drafted by Mr. Reynolds and Miss Lively and given to an agent. And I had been told that there were multiple calls that were incoming from the agency, WME, saying that if Justin doesn't release a statement, then they will, Miss Lively and Mr. Reynolds, leave WME. I was told that the agency called numerous times, and this evidently was a phone call on which a statement was read that was prepared by Mr. Reynolds and Miss Lively. And the only other thing I remember about it was that it was inferred that if this wasn't done, the gloves were coming off. So if you guys remember when we were going through all these sealing requests that the judge hasn't ruled on yet, I got your Manosphere right here. Shut up, man. Okay. I don't know. I don't think Omar knows where the Manosphere is. So if you remember when they're like fighting over these sealing requests, which the judge hasn't ruled on yet, WME came out and said there are messages between Patrick Whitesell, who I think was like executive chairman, and presumably Ryan Reynolds that they don't want to have unsealed. The assumption here, or it seems likely, is that those messages between Patrick and Ryan Reynolds would talk about the threat to leave WME unless they had Justin Baldoni dropped from the agency and he released a statement. So that would, I guess, further prove what he's saying right here. I don't know whether or not those things will ever come out, but I know that they're trying to make sure that it didn't. So I'm assuming those text messages are kind of related to what we just heard here about the call. So, all right. I skimmed through a lot of this stuff because we've read it before, I think. They talk about the Baha'i faith here, which has been coming up like under scrutiny a lot. People accuse them of being a cult. And I would say to that, like any religion, there's going to be, people who are involved with a religion and some squares that are just not great people. That's true of any religion ever. But for the most part, I don't see these people as being like cult-like at all. I've read, a little bit about it. I've talked to people who follow or subscribe to this faith, and I don't get that sense at all whatsoever. So here's just what he had to say about it, which I wanted to put out there since we've been seeing stuff like that. Justin says, I was born into the Baha'i faith, and at 15, as is customary for all Baha'is, I was given the choice to decide if I felt I was a Baha'i. We believe in the independent investigation of truth, so the idea that we don't just become something because our parents are. So at 15, I decided that I was a Baha'i. Okay. They asked, do you think the tenets of that faith influence the mission or thesis behind Wayfarer Studios? He says, I believe so, yeah. As Baha'is, we're told that our work should be a form of service, and so I've always operated with the belief that whatever it is that I do, whether it's entertainment or anything else, I wanted to find a way for it to be of service. And with Wayfarer Studios, we just wanted to apply some of the same tenets to the studio. The idea that we can create things that elevate consciousness in some abstract way, but without being preachy. And with very universal themes, like the elimination of prejudice, the belief in equality, the telling of stories that maybe don't always get told because Hollywood doesn't maybe feel that they are worth telling. So in that sense, I believe that our faith has influenced. And I wanted to point out again that in the other deposition pages we've already read, he says they absolutely don't run things as like a Baha'i only set. They don't want anyone to feel that they have to subscribe to any sort of religious principles or anything like that. But in a general sense, like the people who founded the studio are Baha'i. So they feel like this does kind of, the principles kind of influence their vision of how they want to run their business, I guess, if that makes sense. Okay. Oh yeah, it's Laura's birthday, Omar. Google that clown Myron from the Fresh and Fit podcast. What is the Fresh and Fit podcast? I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't sound like something I have ever listened to. Maybe I will later. Oh, is that supposed to be the Manosphere? Okay. Well, I'll take a look at that later. Okay. Who is Myron? So they ask about Signal here. The reason they're asking about Signal, I believe, is because they're trying to get to the bottom of like how much they use Signal, what they used it for. They're trying to get to the bottom of whether or not Signal auto-deleted certain messages, because both Blake Lively and Stephanie Jones are trying to say that the Wayfarer parties basically deleted evidence or like intentionally allowed evidence to be deleted because Signal auto-deletes messages if you have a certain setting enabled. So they're asking questions about this. He says that he never had Signal until after the lawsuit was filed. Blake Lively's accusations that they, spoliated evidence, got rid of evidence, actually goes back to, I think it was November 2023. So if he's saying, like, I never even had Signal until after the lawsuits were filed in 2024, over a year later, then that doesn't really make sense that he would have, participated in any sort of evidence spoliation. I don't know if they were actually using Signal even at that time, but that's what they've been accused of. And I think this is something else that's supposed to come up in that hearing next week, the oral arguments on summary judgment motions, which is happening next Thursday in New York. It is in person. I'm assuming just the attorneys will be there. I believe it's open to the public. If not, then I'm going to have to cancel my flight. So let's put it that way. So I'm going to go to that and listen to that. I've never been to anything like it before, so I think it'll be interesting. What else did I have to say about that? That's right. So they said like each side will get 1 hour to argue. The Wayfarer parties will go first. They can reserve time to come back and kind of rebut things at the end. But as far as I can tell, it's going ahead as scheduled. the judge said that he intended to or wanted to have the evidence, like the sealing request, ruled on prior to that hearing. So I'm expecting like a flood of evidence to come up soon. But the spoliation arguments are also supposed to be addressed at some time during that, I believe. If not, then I don't know, because he did want to have a hearing about that. So I'll have to find out. Okay. It's after the first hearing. I don't even know what that means, bro. So you'll have to tell me. They also have an attorneys only settlement, some sort of settlement thing going on that day. It was supposed to be the day after, but they moved it to that day. So that is not something that anyone else will be privy to, though. So, all right. They asked him about Jed Wallace. He's like, I hadn't even met Jed. Apparently, he has never met Jed in person. He's saying, no, we never met in person. And then Stephanie Jones' attorneys, when they're asking a lot of these questions, it's going to be pointing towards, you know, did you know that Jed Wallace, basically, and Melissa Nathan, you know, had it out for Stephanie Jones and were planting all these things about her? So you're going to get lots of questions like that. And we won't read them all word for word, but I did highlight some of this stuff here. Yeah, so he's basically saying, I didn't know who Jed was. I learned who he was around the time of the lawsuit. Didn't know, he didn't really know much about what Jed did, just that he was recommended or whatever. Like, he was kind of in the background of these decisions being made when it came to hire crisis PR. That's what a lot of his answers are basically saying. He's like, so many times during this deposition with Stephanie Jones' attorney, he basically had to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Why would I know that? But, you know, politely, like he would, not like I would. So, all right. Down here, he says, I still don't think I know what Jed does. Like, he says, I like to think of myself as someone who is tech savvy or who understands the internet, but I don't. I guess I still don't think I really have ever grasped what he does. The attorney asks, that's because what he does with respect to the internet is highly technical and complicated, right? And of course, the attorneys, you know, want to paint this picture of Jed as like some sort of shadow demon who gives life to creatures in the dark web, who can, you know, untraceably destroy reputations on the internet at the snap of a finger for some reason. Okay. Don't get me wrong, it sounds cool, but I think they would charge way more if he actually had the ability to do that. Okay. What is it you don't grasp about what he does with the internet? Justin says, I know him to be someone that sends a lot of reports, like a lot of reports. So we've seen in other documentation that he was sending like these like kind of social media sentiment reports every, you know, I don't know if it was every day. And so I don't want to give you the wrong information, but he was sending reports on like what was going on social media, what the sentiment was on which, you know, outlet or platform or whatever, all kinds of stuff like that. They're doing like social listening. I don't really know the extent of what they were doing, but also it sounds like he doesn't really know either. It's kind of like somebody else was making these decisions and communicating with these guys. So like, I don't freaking know, you know? He says, somebody who spends a lot of time on the internet Googling and looking up anything that is involved with this case or my name, and then presenting those reports and saying, this is what's happening. Yeah. Justin says, I don't know if that's what his job is. That's just what I don't understand. Okay. All right. They ask, you hired Jed Wallace to be part of your crisis comms in August 2024. He's like, I didn't hire Jed Wallace. So he never hired Jed Wallace, but Wayfair Studios did. What did you understand him to be doing in that time period? Justin says, I don't know. Whatever Melissa was doing. And then, like I said, a lot of his answers are like, I genuinely don't know. So, okay. They ask about the attorneys that were involved in the Signal chats. I don't really know why that's pertinent, but I guess they did have Signal threads with some of their attorneys. At one point, Blake was trying to force those to be turned over. I can't remember if she was successful or not in some scenarios, but, you know. Let's see, did you understand the purpose of moving these communications to Signal to be that the messages would disappear? Justin says, I understood that to be part of it, yeah. Okay, what was the other part of it? He says getting hacked, privacy, which is why a lot of people use Signal. Our government agencies have used Signal for this reason, because it's helpful in keeping communications private. And then also because you don't always want to keep your communications there, especially after a huge lawsuit's been brought against you and people are trying to hack you and find all that, like find out what's going on. Like, you don't want all those communications about your private life to be getting out there either. So yeah, auto delete on old messages makes sense in that situation. Okay. Omar says he's starting an OnlyFans. Yes, I believe that's in here as well. They ask Justin about Omar's OnlyFans. So, all right. Do you always set your Signal messages to auto delete? I set them to whatever the Signal auto thing is. Okay. Let's see. There's not really much we need to read there. So they ask him about screenshots that he sent to someone named Mitz, who works at Wayfair Studios. Do you recall texting with Mitz at Wayfair on Signal? Like, what do you remember telling her about? He says he remembers sending her screenshots of a lot of old texts, things that he would believe help him tell the truth about what actually happened. So they're asking him what was the contents of that. He says, my memory, text messages with my health coach, and text messages with Don Saladino. So Don Saladino is the trainer who worked with both Blake and Justin. Justin asked him at one point, because of his back injury, around how much he thinks, or how much does Blake weigh, because they were going to have to do a lift scene. And then Don Saladino, for some reason, even though Justin was his client, they were working together, goes to Blake and says, he asked about your weight, and made it like this weird, unprofessional thing. Like, oh my God, he thinks you're fat. He thinks you're fat. Like something ridiculous. So I guess he sent screenshots of his text with Don. And then he also sent screenshots of text with his health coach, Jennifer Benson. So they asked about the health coach. He says she tries to help him stay healthy using like supplements, peptides, and helping his immune system. The attorney asks, what about your text messages with your health coach? Did you believe at that time would help you explain the truth of what happened? Justin says, if my memory is correct, I was being accused of many things, but one of them was like putting Miss Lively on a phone call with a dietitian, which was a lie and an extreme distortion of the truth. Okay. Right. We already talked about Don Saladino there. Okay. Do you recall sending to Mitz texts of screenshots that had anything to do with Stephanie Jones or JonesWorks, or the work that you did with Stephanie or JonesWorks? He says there was very little conversation about Stephanie Jones at all during that time, because I don't think she was top of mind. Okay. We don't need to read about his men's group. Let's see. They're like asking him again all these things about his thoughts on like, why do you think men need to work on things in certain ways? He just says, I think every human needs to work on things. This is not really relevant to the lawsuit, so I'm not going to go over it word for word today. I don't feel like that's going to be helpful. Let's see. They ask him here about handwritten notes. I don't know why they would need to do that, but apparently he has kept them. So then they ask him here, do you keep a diary? He says, I wish I did. God, I wish I did. It's a no. I've always wanted to, but I guess he just doesn't keep a diary. That's the reason I highlighted this, and I could have just ignored it, was like, when I was talking about third parties the other day, like when this stuff from third parties is going to be released to the public and people are going to see everything, like these lawyers ask all kinds of shit in these depositions. Like, does anybody need to ask if Justin Baldoni keeps a diary? Probably not, right? But now everybody would know. Like, if the answer was yes, I've kept a special diary of all my thoughts and feelings, now everybody in the world would know about it. So when I was talking about the third parties the other day and trying to explain my thought process on why I think it kind of sucks that everything for third parties can be out there, and there is like a pretty, at times, a high burden for redactions. It's kind of a nuanced situation to me, because it's like at one point, on some level, it's like, yes, I think the public should know everything that goes into these decisions that are being made by the courts. But at the same time, if some random crew member were deposed and asked if they kept a diary and like what was written in their special diary, like I think that would kind of suck, that like if like a random crew member had that information like just let out to the public. Like, what if they're embarrassed about that? You know what I mean? Like, that kind of sucks, but these attorneys can ask anything and this stuff is going to come out. So it is what it is. All right. Give me one sec here. Sing this doc instead of reading. No. I'm not going to do that. Sorry. But thank you for the suggestion. All right. Anyways. So I don't think we need to really read too much more about that. Let's see. They start talking about his relationship with Stephanie Jones, which gets interesting. He says that basically he met Stephanie Jones when he was, and then he started working with her, I guess, when he was working on Jane the Virgin. He was told that she was a great publicist, that she had a lot of really great clients. So he starts working with her personally. So Stephanie Jones becomes Justin Baldoni's personal publicist. And then sometime after that, she becomes not Stephanie Jones personally, but Jones Works, right? Jones Works becomes the publicist for Wayfair Studios. Okay. So he was already a client first, then Wayfair signs with her or whatever. Okay. So he starts describing the beginning of his relationship with Stephanie Jones and everything that happened before it ends with us. He says that she was supportive. He was, happy with her. It says Stephanie was never my personal publicist, so that's hard for me to answer, but I was happy overall with what the company was doing for me. Let's see. He says he would text Stephanie every once in a while. They would have a phone call. She was always reaching out to congratulate him if something, was going on, or she would encourage him if he was going to do something, or if there was press. He appreciated the words of encouragement when she sent them. All right. Sorry, make sure I didn't mute myself there. Okay. So he says he generally had a positive relationship with Stephanie Jones, and that Jones Works was doing good work as a publicist. All right. Okay. They ask if he ever had any issues with Stephanie before everything ends with us happened, before the filming started. He says no. There was never any reason to fire her or anything like that. Justin says, I remember feeling she didn't have much time for me, but I'm also a realist to know I'm not The Rock, or, so I understood that I was a client, but that she was having other people manage me in my career. The other person mainly being Jen Abel. So there were many times when I didn't feel she had time for me and that I was just kind of there, but there was no reason to fire her. No, not at all. Okay. During the times that Jones Works was your publicist before the filming of It Ends With Us, did they ever help handle any controversies for you or Wayfair? Justin says nothing that became public, because if there was ever something that I felt anxious about, yes. They ask about this previous lawsuit in connection with 5 Feet Apart. They said, or he said basically that, he was able to talk to Stephanie about it and all that, but he didn't have to really request anything. He would just call her if he needed something, but there was no real PR around that. It wasn't like a crisis. He felt like it was a crisis, but it wasn't like a PR crisis, I guess. He says it wasn't like a big public thing, but I definitely remember calling Stephanie and Jen about it. Okay. Here they mention a comment that Justin apparently made to Stephanie at some point in time where he says, I never get your voicemail. And then Justin says, I remember often telling Stephanie that she needed to take a break because she was always on, and joking with her, you got kids and you can only imagine the phone calls and all the people that she was getting. So I could imagine that I made that comment. Okay. Here they mentioned that Justin introduced her to Colleen Hoover. He says, I recall learning that Colleen had done nail polish or something for the book, and I couldn't believe it. I believe she was getting backlash, which ultimately was terrible for the project we were developing, the movie. And I remember asking Colleen if she had anybody that was helping her make decisions. She said, no. I said, I think you need a publicist. And so I introduced her to Stephanie Jones. And I think I remember, I've never really followed Colleen Hoover, but I think I remember she had tried to do some coloring books or something related to this franchise, the It Ends With Us stuff. And it's people thought it was a little tone deaf. Anyone who's a follower of the book maybe needs to let me know in the comments or something, because I can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was nail polish. That's what he remembers it being. So, Lauren, it's Friday. I'm bored. Why are you bored? He's talking about, Omar's in the comments talking about the karaoke we did in California. Okay. Right, so we don't need to read all that. So at this point, he's introducing Colleen to Stephanie, saying, this is my friend, Stephanie Jones. Justin says, I considered her a friend. Yeah. Okay. They're talking about when the Business Insider piece on Stephanie Jones, the Who's Afraid of Stephanie Jones kind of what she believes to be a hit piece, and it is a very negative article about her, was coming out. He says that he learned it from Stephanie, that it was coming out, and he doesn't remember the exact word she was using, but Justin says she was very upset, and she FaceTimed me crying, and she said that they're like trying to ruin her life or something. She was very emotional. I don't remember the exact words. The lawyer asked, did you feel for her in that situation? Justin says, I did. It was very complicated. Why was it complicated? Justin says, because she was my publicist and I was struggling during that period myself, I didn't have a lot of emotional bandwidth. And while I considered her a friend, I think there are different levels of friendship. And that conversation, it felt like I might not have been the best person for her to be FaceTiming with these feelings. And like, yeah, that is a little uncomfortable, right? The attorney asks why. He says, because I was her client. She was meant to be my publicist. It was the kind of call you might have with a therapist, which is a fair criticism, I think. Did you offer to write her a letter of support to the Business Insider reporter? Justin says, after she asked me to, I did. So he did write like a nice statement, I guess, on Stephanie Jones' behalf and sent it to the Business Insider reporter. He told Stephanie Jones when she asked him to do it, he was like, I'm sorry you're going through this. I'd be happy to. And they ask, were you happy to? Justin says, being completely honest, I don't know if I was actually happy to. I think that was what you say, like, I'd be happy to. And that's true. Like most people, when we say it's like, oh, I'd be happy to, it's like we might be happier not having to do that. But sometimes you just say that when somebody asks you for a favor, just when it's like a polite thing to say. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean you're literally happy, but you know, okay. Okay. And then Stephanie, I guess, is still talking to Justin about this article, and they read a message that she sent him. It says, they wouldn't say a man was aggressive or tough or intense. Those are all the words they're using when they call clients. Do you see that? Justin says to Stephanie at that point, I'm sorry you're going through this. Of course not. It's gendered. They ask what Justin meant by it's gendered. Justin says, I was just, again, I don't remember exactly what I was feeling in this moment. I do remember feeling like this to me, it made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to tell her that because she was going through so much. It was interesting to be asked by your publicist, whose job it is to handle public relations, to make a public statement for your publicist. So I know I felt uncomfortable. And from what I'm reading, she says, they wouldn't say a man was aggressive or tough or intense. So I think I was agreeing with her, trying to make her feel seen by saying, of course not, it's gendered. So I was under the assumption that what she was saying was the words we use to describe men are not used in the same way to describe women. So that's, I'm assuming, what I meant when I said gendered. Okay. So this is like kind of a weird, uncomfortable situation for him. He's starting to see her break down a little bit. He needs her to be his publicist. As he said, he was going through a lot at the time himself. And it's just getting like kind of a weird relationship. And when you're paying someone to do a job and you're kind of having a crisis yourself, that's not really the relationship you want to be having with them. She's literally asking him to do PR for her. So that's not great, but let's see. And they start talking about, you know, those statements about being gendered, or would they describe a female CEO the same way? And he's like, I don't think I can make a statement about that. Let's see. We don't need to read that. Okay. So they're still asking about the gendered comment. Justin says, when I used it here, I was agreeing with Stephanie because it appears to me that she was needing to vent and share that they are calling her aggressive or tough or intense. And she says here they wouldn't say a man was aggressive or tough or intense. So I'm just trying to make her feel better. Again, I can't remember exactly what I was feeling, but it looks to me like I'm saying, yeah, of course not, it's gendered. They ask, did you find her, Stephanie, to be aggressive or tough or intense? Justin says, there were times I called her Mama Bear because of her aggression, which I said endearingly, but I didn't know the Stephanie that she was inferring people or accusing her to be. Okay. And then Justin says he never read the Business Insider article. Okay. Right. Here they're asking questions to Justin about that statement potentially being removed from the Business Insider piece. He doesn't know if it was or wasn't. The statement he wrote, it says, Stephanie has always been an exceptional publicist and member of my brain trust, not just for me personally, but also for my company, Wayfair Studios. Okay. He also said she's an incredibly hard worker and she finds a way to be available at all hours of the day and has gone above and beyond to ensure the success of not just me, but my company. Okay. They ask if that was a true statement at the time. He says, I believe so. Justin also wrote, she has built an amazing team who I also work very closely with, and I have never had a moment of hesitation in trusting her. And then you go on to write, her advice and guidance has always been spot on. I have never personally witnessed her mistreat anyone, and on the contrary, she's always treated me and my team with the utmost respect, like family. Okay. So he sends that to Katie Warren, the reporter at Business Insider. And then Katie Warren responds, thanks so much for sending this. Are you free for a quick call sometime today or tomorrow? And then Justin never responds to that email, and he never had a call with the reporter. Let's see. And then he's talking to Jen and Jamie about this. He says, I recall telling them I both felt uncomfortable being asked to email a reporter directly when I was in the middle of, I was going through a lot. And I remember Jamie being also effusive about and saying that and agreeing that we should. I wanted to, but I just wasn't. It was just an uncomfortable position to be in because she was my publicist and she was asking me to make a statement for her. And I just remember feeling weird about it. I remember Jen saying how much it would mean to Stephanie if I did it. And also I remember Jen kind of acting more like a publicist in the situation and saying, and yet, if you're not comfortable, you don't have to, but she would really appreciate it if you did. So Jen was kind of serving as my publicist in that moment because Stephanie in that moment was kind of reaching out outside of a publicist, more like, hey, I'm in a crisis, I need help. And then ultimately I decided to do it for her. Okay. So he, I guess, told Jen and Jamie that he was being made to feel a little uncomfortable. And then they asked, did you ever tell that specifically or directly to Stephanie Jones? He says, no, I didn't. Let's see. All right. Do you know if a decision was ever made by Jamie Heath to keep the statement or to withdraw it? Justin says, no, I sent the statement, so I assumed it ended up in the article, but I don't know. All right. They ask him if he generally defers to Jamie to make decisions around like publicity matters and stuff like that. He says yes. That seems about right. He seems like more of the creative, that he doesn't, do day-to-day decisions like that when it comes to like some of the deeper PR stuff. Okay. It's would you have been surprised to learn that Jen Abel asked Jamie to retract the statement of support that you sent for Stephanie Jones to the Business Insider reporter? Justin says, I would be surprised because I don't think or know if she did. Okay. And do you remember a big issue around whether or not Stephanie had ever spoken to the Daily Mail around that time? Justin says yes. And that was a big deal, right, when the press started picking up this alleged feud between you and Blake. And that was around when I think he was talking about crisis PR. They're asking that. It was becoming a public crisis, this thing between him and Blake. Okay. Okay. He mentions a text from Jamie saying, I remember Jamie sending a text that he told me about Stephanie, basically saying, stop, don't make any phone calls. And that if she continued, we would be leaving, but I don't remember the date of that. I don't remember where this is in that timeline. I would need to see. So Jamie Heath, we went over this a little bit ago. Jamie Heath was talking to Stephanie Jones, asking her to stop, don't reach out to anybody, don't say anything to anybody to like potentially ruin this kind of ceasefire we have between us and Blake's PR people. And Stephanie Jones was refusing. She's basically saying, well, I'll do what I want to protect my reputation. I'm just like, hold on, lady. Like, you got to like take a beat, do what's best for the client, do what they're asking you to. She was refusing to honor their wishes, that kind of thing. And so that's kind of why that was being brought up. Okay. So they're asking if he had any knowledge about Jen or Melissa, having any talk with the Business Insider people. He's like, no, I don't know anything about that. Okay. They're asking him questions about this like kind of feud between Melissa and Stephanie Jones a lot, where he's like, I didn't know Melissa at the time. I just learned about these things from you. Okay. Okay. So they ask him again about this Business Insider piece. He says he still had a friendly relationship with Stephanie Jones at that time, but he remembers feeling like she wasn't personally, like not as an expert, he says, I remember feeling personally like she seemed off and maybe wasn't of sound mind. I remember feeling that she was more worried about her own reputation than what I believed to be her work as a publicist, and I would say taking care of ours. Okay. And then they ask him, do you think there's something unsound of mind to be worried about your own reputation as a publicist more than your clients' reputations? Justin says, no, it was more in the conversations I had with her. She felt different than previous conversations. Her speech at times was a bit erratic. She was like bouncing back and forth between things, it just felt like any person, when you have a relationship with someone, they appear different than they had the last few years of knowing them. That's what made me not sure. Okay. Not sure if I felt at that point in time, I was grateful that she was not the lead to represent me personally, because Jen was the lead to represent him personally. Okay. And then they try to like relate this back to him, saying, do you think in the time since these lawsuits were filed against you that you had behaved to anyone differently than you did before? Do you think the stress of the negative spotlight in the public has caused that? Have you felt distress when public articles were written about you? And then he's, kind of saying, yeah, sure, I feel that way. And then they kind of try to put it on him like, well, you're saying that Stephanie Jones was like acting weirdly based on the stress from all the public backlash, but you also apparently acted, like not like yourself because you were getting public backlash. But the thing is, Justin Baldoni was not working for Stephanie Jones. So like, it's not really the same situation at all, is it? Okay. I wanted to sum that up. I don't want to read all that, right away, right directly. He tries to explain it like this. So Justin says, if I had a relationship with my doctor who was going to perform surgery on me for the last 5 years, and I went in to meet him before surgery and he started acting strange, and then I found out that he was being attacked and he had a lot of personal drama, maybe he was going through a divorce, I wouldn't want him to operate on me because I'm paying him for his services. So while I understand, especially the way you're phrasing it now, how emotionally disturbing it was for Stephanie, she was my publicist and I was paying her for her services. And for me, having been through what I've been through the last year, it's the reason why I wouldn't take on any jobs, because I wouldn't be of sound mind to do my job to the best of my ability while dealing with that stress. Okay. And that makes sense, right? Okay. They ask him about the sequence that led up to, well, first they asked, did you ever tell Stephanie Jones the sentiments you were expressing to us right now about her mental state or fitness? He's like, no, that would have, been unnecessary and hurt her. So, but like, why would he have to do that? It's not his job as a client to do that. You know what I mean? So, Fernando, thank you for the $5. This channel is awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I do my best. So, all right. Give me 1 second here, guys, to get a sip of water. Butter's like fully asleep over there. I don't know if you can see that. Hang on. Yeah, he's like fully asleep. God, you're boring. Okay. Oh, I picked his eyes up. All right. 1 second. Okay. So they ask him about how he came to hire Melissa Nathan and all that stuff. The press was talking. People were starting to talk about like the drama with Blake behind the scenes and all that. It felt like a crisis to him. We kind of know all this stuff already, right? There's not too much to learn here. So, do you have an understanding of what led Wayfair and you to hire Melissa Nathan instead of any of the other recommended PRs? He says, I believe I entrusted that to Jamie. So again, Jamie's making a lot of these decisions. Okay. You knew at the time that Stephanie did not recommend that you hire Melissa Nathan, correct? He says, I knew that Stephanie did not like Melissa Nathan. Yes. But the thing is, we're talking about how Stephanie Jones was like not appearing of sound mind. So when that's happening, then it becomes a little more difficult to think that their advice is going to be a good idea to take. You know what I mean? So, I think that kind of factors into a decision like that. So, okay. He remembers that Stephanie warned him against hiring Melissa Nathan. There was something there, like there was a word shady. Okay. And then Stephanie, I guess, told him that Melissa and the tactics she uses are not the kinds of things that you want to associate yourself with. Again, you got to put that in the context of like Stephanie is seeming a little off to him, to put it nicely. So it's hard to like take her word as sound. We don't need to see this. We've already read this stuff in different videos about Stephanie's text that she sent and all that. Okay. We have seen this before, but just to summarize, they ask about this Hollywood Reporter piece where they had talked about how he hired Melissa Nathan for Crisis PR. He says that they assumed that Blake's people had put that out there. He was worried because like he had hired a crisis person because there was a lot of talk about the cast unfollowing him and all that. Let's see. Justin said he was really frustrated about the Crisis PR leak, like the article about Johnny Depp's firm, basically Melissa Nathan's firm, being hired, because he said it made it seem like he had something to hide and that there was abuse or something like that. So they're still talking about how that came to be leaked. Right. He says he presumes that, he meant Miss Lively's team was the one to leak it. Like he thought Blake's team was doing it, which is a reasonable thing to assume at that point. Right. So he's talking to Melissa Nathan about why this is frustrating to him. And she tells him a PR should never be part of a story, but also I work with many people who are in trouble and protect them. So she tries to kind of talk him down, but says also that she's incredibly frustrated also. Okay. And then she acts like, well, let's put it this way. She also sends a text that says, Jen knows I spoke for an hour on the phone. She swears she had nothing to do with it, but I know someone placed this. So Melissa Nathan is kind of saying, like, I have no idea who did this, basically, and I'm frustrated too, is what I'm getting from this, what they're saying. And remember that this is what Stephanie Jones' attorneys are presenting. We don't know the other side of this at all. This is just, I'm just reading it as is, or kind of summarizing it as is. All right. This message that Melissa wrote to you is part of the confirmation that you were getting that your team didn't have any part in leaking this information, right? Justin says, I believe so. And then they ask here, did Melissa Nathan ever tell you that she, in fact, was responsible for the leak that culminated in this story? Did she ever tell you she was lying to you when she told you that she was incredibly frustrated by this? Justin says she did not. So they read him some text messages, and the text kind of show that Melissa Nathan knew what was going on. She was in communication with a reporter from, THR, who was putting that out there. Let's see. A friend of his, I guess messaged him and said, this is a bad look because it looks like you're trying to cover something up. And the attorney asked, isn't this the kind of association exactly what Stephanie Jones was warning you about when she advised you not to hire Melissa? Justin says, again, I don't know what she was referring to, so I can't answer that. All right. See, I don't know if I went over there. This here. All right. So these were the text messages where it basically showed that Melissa Nathan knew what was going on with that. And she was communicating with people who had knowledge of the article. Here, a text message from Melissa to one of the reporters says, just checking in to see if I need to look out for this article, and if so, when. Pam, the reporter, says, was just texting you. The story's going up. Very fair, and it's going up soon. So she knew before it was published what was going on there, and she had spoken to them. But she told Justin that she was very frustrated and had no idea who leaked that. So Melissa Nathan, again, this is how Stephanie Jones' attorneys are presenting it. I don't exactly know the other side of the story, and I'm sure that she was asked about it, certainly. But we can't see that yet, so I'm not going to speak to the other side of the story. I have no idea. I can only tell you what I'm reading here. So, okay. Let's get through some of this stuff. So they ask him about Katie Case, who worked or works for Melissa Nathan. They say, are you aware that they were given talking points for the copy for the Stephanie Jones Leaks website? Sorry, including that Stephanie Jones holds clients hostage, that she leaks clients' confidential information, and she treats her employees horribly. Justin says, I was unaware. Like, why would he be aware of that stuff? But the reason I've crossed out so much of this and we're not going to go over today is a lot of it pertains to this Rebel Wilson, Amanda Ghost feud. There's a whole other lawsuit that involves some of the same people with the Crisis PR people, I guess Jed Wallace and Melissa Nathan and Tag. And it doesn't really have much to do with Justin and Blake. other than they kind of try to make this association where is it possible that you knew about or you didn't know about this stuff that was going on in this other situation, and that these are the type of people who would do these kinds of things, make smear websites? Is it possible that you just didn't know that they were smearing Stephanie Jones and Blake Lively? So that's the kind of association they try to make there. But we don't need to go through too much of the Amanda Ghost Rebel Wilson thing because it's kind of irrelevant to the reason that we're here. That's something I'll do separately some other day. Okay. Here they say, and again, this is another one of those things where it's like you need to see the context and you need to see the other side of the story. But they ask, were you aware that Melissa and Jenna Abel have joked multiple times about killing Stephanie Jones as a gift to each other? He says, I am not. Which again, why would he know that? Like, what the hell? And again, context, please. That's almost certainly, you know, even though they say they're joking, it's like, what is the context there? Like, can we please see what was actually said? But of course not at this time. So, all right. Okay. So this is like kind of what I was saying here. Do you know if they use the same tactics with the smear websites and stuff like that against Stephanie Jones? He's like, no, I don't know why I would know that. So there's not too much here that we really need to read. And they ask, you know, would they do the same thing? Do you know if they could have done the same thing against Blake, like before or during this lawsuit on your behalf? He says no. He says absolutely not when it comes to Stephanie Jones as well. Justin says, I would never ask them to do that, and I have no knowledge of anything that they've done, so I don't know how to answer that. Okay. Here we have, and again, this is only one side of the story we're getting, but here we have something that says, are you aware that Brianna Butler Coslow testified under oath in this case that she deliberately leaked information to the Daily Mail in August of 2024 that resulted in a negative story about Blake Lively? Justin says, I was not. They say here, if that happened in August of 2024, is that someone you would have expected them to tell you that or run by you before they did? And he says, yes, they had very clear directions not to create anything negative. So again, they're trying to establish here that maybe they were doing this stuff without his knowledge. And if they did create something negative that resulted in a negative story about Blake Lively, is that something they would have expected or that you would expect them to tell you about? He says, I would have expected them to probably tell Jamie. I was not in communication every day about everything. Okay. And then they try to kind of say, well, if it was Tag who was doing this and they talked to the Daily Mail, do you think that, you know, it's their fault basically that the truce was broken, that the Daily Mail put this out and the truce was broken? And Justin says, hang on, sorry. Justin says, my understanding of the truce wasn't negative stories. It was that like none of us would be in touch with any reporters about any of that, anything. So I don't think it was just negative stories. It was commenting on the current speculation. Okay. And then they ask if the truce was not to be in contact with any reporters relating to anything about the speculation about what was going on between you and Blake on the film, you would agree with me that somebody from Tag planting a negative story about Blake broke that truce. Justin says, if that's what happened, then I would imagine that that would be accurate. I don't know if that's what happened. I wasn't there. Okay. We don't need to read that. So he kind of points out here, like, I haven't been able to do any of my own investigation. You're just telling me and I'm hearing and I'm responding to you. So that's kind of what I'm getting at as well. It's like, I'm reading this stuff as is, but I don't know the other side of the story here. So, all right. Okay. Give me 1 second here, guys. Okay. So this is where I have to kind of skim a little bit because I stopped doing my highlights, but we're pretty close to the end here. We've already gone over the last couple pages. So let me see here. They show him a text thread and they ask him, have you ever talked to Jen Abel about why she said this about you? So we know that he was shown text messages where they were saying some not so nice things about him. And so he says, well, actually, Jen called me one morning. I was sleeping and she was in tears and she just said, Justin, I'm so sorry. I said, for what? And then she said, some texts have been made public where I'm talking shit about you. And I'm just so sorry. I don't believe the things I said. I was just pissed because you didn't want to do something and I'm sorry. And I said, I understand. I'm going to forgive her. it says here, I'm not going to forgive her, but I think he meant I'm going to forgive her based on the context here. I'm not going to like hold it against her. I'm sure everyone's phone was scanned. I'm sure there's a lot of people that talk shit about a lot of people. So as a rule, I do my best to not do that. And yet I am. I'm sure lots of people have said these things about me. Okay. And then they read this text to Justin, which we've already seen. It says, he may fire us because even if we put together an amazing campaign, it's not going to change the fact that he's so unlikable and unrealistic as a leading man. There's no chemistry with him and Blake. You and I both know that she will be resistant to promote this movie, and press will be reluctant to do anything with Justin without Blake being a part of it. So those are my thoughts. So these kinds of messages are the things that he was seeing in hindsight. Or not in hindsight, but he was seeing now. Okay. Justin says he left Jones Works to go with Jen Abel as a publicist because she was his publicist for years and he trusted her. Okay. They ask if he's seen anything that shows Stephanie Jones is talking shit about him the way that Jen Abel was. He says, I haven't seen any documents about that, Stephanie Jones in general, to my knowledge. Okay. They ask him about how the publicist joked about whether or not his faith was a cult. Justin responds, I think anytime someone makes a religious joke, I think that's not okay. It seems to have happened a lot in this case. The lawyer says, including from your own publicist, it seems. All right. Okay. There is a text from Jen here that they're showing him. I guess it's about, let's see. I guess it's about Melissa Nathan. It says, thanks. I have also had a negative experience where I confronted her with lies and shady behavior and the attempts to poach, and I had to get the client involved to straighten out the situation. Okay. Right. And then we've seen these text messages before where she's talking to, I guess, Matthew Mitchell, and she says, Melissa Nathan talks out of both sides of her mouth. Or Matthew says that, and then Jen says, she's a piece of shit. I honestly used to like her, and now I see her for how she really is. And, like, these text messages don't, like, actually prove anything other than these people talk shit about each other all the time. So I don't really, I don't know what to say to that. Did Jen Abel ever relate to you that she thought that Melissa Nathan is a piece of shit? He says no. So the thing is, like, your personal feelings towards someone, so a lot of times they need to be left out of the professional realm. So, like, maybe you don't relay to your client that you don't like somebody personally. You know what I mean? I don't blame her for not doing that. I mean, also, they don't really like to talk about people the way the general population does. Like some of the high people, they don't talk about people like that. They don't gossip about people like that. So, I mean, it's not, unheard of for somebody not to relay that kind of information for multiple reasons. The professional thing and then the religious thing. It's like, maybe you just don't say that to some people. That's just my thought. So, okay. We can skim through this. Okay, they talk about when they retained tag. They talk about the scenario planning document. And we've seen these sections before, I believe, so I'm not going to get too much into this because I've read them to you guys already. Let's see. Here, Justin is saying, like, they're talking about crisis PR. Justin is saying, I was terrified of Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively in general, especially considering they had just threatened us and said they were taking the gloves off if I didn't release a statement. Okay. The lawyer asked, were you scared at this point in time that Blake Lively might make public any of the accusations about your on-set behavior that she had made privately to you and Sony? Okay. Justin says, I was afraid of lies coming out about me. Right? Lies from Blake Lively? He says yes. And then they asked about your behavior on the set. Justin says, well, it was one of the things, lies in general, I didn't know. I mean, at this point, I was already made aware that her team was pitching stories that I was in a cult, and I had already been told that Mr. Reynolds had told agents that I was a predator of some kind. So I was made aware that there was damage that they were trying to do to me already, and I didn't know what they were capable of. Right. Is it fair to say at this point in time you wanted to defend yourself in the event that Blake Lively made public some of the accusations about your on-set behavior that she had already made privately, including to you and Wayfair and to Sony? He says, I think it's fair to say that I wanted to plan to defend myself from any lies that were about to be told or anything else they were going to try to do to me. Okay. So here they're talking again about that document, the protections document or whatever, or the scenario planning document. We've seen everything about that I feel like we need to read at this point today anyways. Yeah, we've seen these texts in the complaint and all that. Let's see. It's still talking about scenario planning. So they're complaining because he didn't like the scenario planning document here. And so these are text messages from like Brianna and Katie who worked for TAG. It says, I'm sorry, that document was strong and we walked through all the possibilities of him doing some big sit down, which would kill him. And then Katie Case writes, it's really fucking strong. He can't come off as the victim. She'll destroy him. Let's see. And then down below, Brianna says, I think he'll be fine on the call once we walk him through. And then Melissa Nathan says, he will be. We need to be tough. Okay. And then Melissa Nathan writes, exactly, Brianna, I need you to be in a good place with your camera on, if okay, to help me really talk toughly to him. I wouldn't usually ask, but he sounds like a fucking mess. Jesus Christ. The lawyer asked, did you feel like a fucking mess at the time? And Justin says, did I feel like a fucking mess? I was really emotional. I mean, I don't know if I would call myself a fucking mess, but if they're clearly hearing about me, so they're entitled to their opinion. Okay. And then another text from Melissa said, and also this is the first one that Jen is giving us and she's taking all the clients. All right. They ask if Melissa ever encouraged Justin to leave Jonesworks to go with Jen. Justin remembers talking to Melissa and telling her that he was going with Jen, but he doesn't remember Melissa saying you should go with her. Let's see. They ask how he made the decision to go with Jen. He says that was a consultation between me and Jamie and Tara. Tara Hanks, the president of Wayfair. Okay. All right. So they're still talking about deciding when they would go with Jen. He says Jen had been with them since the beginning. Okay. Right. I don't really see anything new here that we need to go through. All right, just asking more about hiring TAG. Do you have any recollection of any ideas that you had that you shared with TAG? He says, I mean, I really wanted to focus, not just TAG, but also Jennifer Abel. I really wanted to focus on amplifying the voices of survivors. I wanted to focus on the DV. I wanted to focus on the movie and not all this speculation and drama. Okay. Did you personally ever have any conversations with Stephanie Jones about the instructions that Wayfair was giving TAG in terms of how to proceed? Justin says, I don't think I had any real conversations with Stephanie outside of text through July and August. Okay. He says he thinks Stephanie was on vacation somewhere. Got it. Here they're asking about how he came to learn about like the New York Times article. He says minutes after he received an email from Mike Gottlieb, the attorney for Blake Lively. It says, I got an email from the New York Times saying they were running a story the next morning And then the next morning, there were quite a lot of text messages from people worried about me and concerned. So that's how I learned about it. Okay. We don't need to read too much about the New York Times article here. He says, I believe he says that he never read the New York Times article in full. I believe the New York Times article insinuated that I launched a smear campaign against Miss Lively, which is completely untrue. I believe it said that I sexually harassed Miss Lively, which is also very untrue. So there's two untrue statements. Okay. They talk about that Hailey Bieber article where he's like sending that to his PR people and saying, this is what we would need in regards to kind of their strategy for how they're handling things with Blake. Okay. So Justin says, I sent it to Jen Abel saying in the event that Miss Lively came out and said lies about me, then we would need to come forward with the truth. The Hailey Bieber article said that she like bullied a bunch of women or something, and that was the sentiment. So the attorney here asked, was it your suggestion that you would come forward with allegations that Miss Lively was a bully? Justin says, it was my understanding that I would come forward with what my truth was, and I had felt very bullied. Okay. Was it your intention to suggest that you should be coming forward with statements that Miss Lively was a bully to other women? He says, no, this had nothing to do with other women. This was just what this article was about. Okay. At the time, I felt very bullied and scared and very alone, and we were planning for all the various things that could happen. That's why I said would as the operative word. This was a part of the scenario planning document, and the hope was that the movie was going to come out and everything was going to be fine and everyone was going to have success and we would never need anything, and that's the truth. Okay. So they ask here, is it your testimony that when you saw and sent this post to Jen Abel, you saw the word history of bullying, but you did not continue to read where it said many women? Justin says, this has nothing to do with women. I don't know if Miss Lively has bullied other women. The attorney asked, did you read any press coverage that came out in August 2024 that did accuse Miss Lively of bullying other women? Justin says, later I did. Women including, the attorney asks, women including Shasti Fla, I believe. Justin says, I learned about the name, yes. And women including Leighton Meester. He says, from Gossip Girl, I didn't read anything about her being a bully to Leighton Meester. Okay. The attorney says, are you aware of the article that Brianna Butler Coslow testified under oath in this case that she leaked and helped to plant in the Daily Mail about Miss Lively contained allegations that Miss Lively had bullied Shasti Fla and had bullied Leighton Meester? Justin says, I was unaware of that. I was also unaware that she bullied Leighton Meester. I didn't even know about that. Yeah. And then the attorney asks, are you aware that even though that you here suggested to Jen Abel that what you would need in the event that Miss Lively disclosed anything negative about you is articles similar to this one that says Hailey Bieber's history of bullying many women? Justin says he disagrees with the way the question is phrased. Let's see. Let me try to understand this here. You suggested you would need articles about similar to Hailey Bieber's history of bullying many women, and then tag the company you employed as Crisis PR did in fact plant an article about Blake bullying other women. Justin says, so what is the question? And the question is, the attorney says, do you think that's a coincidence? Justin says, I don't think it's a coincidence that I felt bullied and that it seems the internet dug up true stories of how Miss Lively bullied other people. So it just shows that I wasn't the only one who was bullied. Ms. Shaw says, the attorney, Ms. Shaw, when you say the internet dug up stories, what do you mean by that? Justin says, it seemed like people came forward with their own experiences of being bullied to the extent that I never had to. Okay. The attorney asks, how does this fit in with the strategy that you were discussing with Miss Abel and Tag about promoting positive coverage of the film? Justin says, this is part of a what happens if scenario. Okay. The attorney says, so if positive doesn't work, then you would move to something like this. Justin says, if positive doesn't work, how? We said this is a part of a what happens if scenario. Okay. Justin says, as I testified earlier, if Miss Lively were to capitalize on her threats that her and Mr. Reynolds made through her agent, to my agent, to me, and plant negative stories, which I was told she already was doing, such as I'm part of a cult or that I'm a predator, and continue to come forward with lies, then we would have to have some sort of plan. As they are Hollywood titans and I'm very clearly a nobody as it relates, or at least what they feel I am, or what my former agency thought of me as, I was also dropped very quickly per their request. So we need some sort of plan if someone is attacking you with big guns and missiles and dropping bombs on you. In our day and age, you can't just die. I have a family I have to protect. I have a company that I started. So we were planning for what would happen if she were to attack me and to lie about me and hurt my reputation. That's all it was. Okay. Okay. They're talking again about the Hailey Bieber stuff. Let's see. They're talking about the PR strategy, and he's basically saying, I don't know, to a bunch of this stuff. So I don't need to read all that. We're getting closer to the end here. It's just going to be a few more pages, I think. Give me one sec. Okay. They talk here about the article that came out where it says the source told them Ryan thought the script was a disaster and he had to save it. Okay. And that Mr. Reynolds or Miss Lively came out and said that Ryan wrote the rooftop scene, which was news to him as the director. Okay. Justin says, in the moment, instead of saying that didn't happen to the people/person who were asking him about it, he said how great Ryan was. I didn't want to say anything to contradict that, but there was already an existing narrative that was out there. Okay. I do remember passing on a message from my partner who suggested something to that effect, because essentially, if the script was a mess, then he would be saying that the writer, who was a female who worked her ass off for years on this to get it right, clearly didn't know what she was doing, which I completely disagreed with. So flipping a narrative was meant an existing narrative that was already being put out by, I would say, the other side. That'd be Blake. So they're talking about that statement from Steve. I guess Steve was passing on the sentiment that they wanted to flip this narrative that Ryan saved the script, which was a disaster, because it was suggesting that the female writer did like a terrible job and didn't know what she was doing. And they found that to be misogynistic for some reason. So, well, not for some reason, you know the reason, but okay. Still talking about the same thing here. And we've read these parts already, so I'm not going to have to do too much here. They ask, you didn't think the idea that Mr. Sarowitz was relaying was because they came out with a story, let's flip it against them and essentially make Ryan look like a misogynist? Justin says, I don't believe we had to make Ryan look like a misogynist. The attorney says, that wasn't my question, and Justin says, that was my answer. Okay. Wait. They're asking him again about why he decided to leave, I guess, and go with Jen Abel when she left Stephanie Jones. Justin basically explains here, and I remember skimming over this earlier, like if he was at a different agency and he had an agent for years and he talked to that agent every day, and the agent called him and said he was going to a different agency, he would probably, feel loyal to that agent that he had the relationship with versus the agency. So that's how he viewed the situation with Jen and Stephanie Jones. He was loyal to his publicist, Jen, who was leaving the agency, so he went with her. Okay. There's nothing too crazy here. Okay. So Justin's here saying like how he was talking to Stephanie Jones while he was filming the movie. It Ends With Us. He says, I don't remember when it was. I remember giving them an update on what my experience was like filming the movie. I remember sharing some of the moments of conflict that I had with Miss Lively, just how difficult this movie was. I don't remember it being a long conversation. I remember her responses. I don't remember how long the conversation was. The attorney asked, what do you remember about her responses? Justin says, I remember laughing because she got very protective of me and said things that I will not repeat on camera about Miss Lively and things she's heard about her and Mr. Reynolds. And she talked about a lot about Mr. Reynolds and how terrible he was. And she was kind of acting like a mama bear. Don't mess with. And I remember that because she was approaching it like she's been around for a long time, so she knows the inside scoop. She's been a publicist for so long. And I think she represented The Rock. And she said on the call that Mr. Reynolds had like terrorized The Rock or something to that extent. Something about a letter. I don't remember the details, but something about like he had written a letter and it was like they wouldn't do press together. I don't know. What does that remind you of? Ryan writing a letter and saying he won't do press with The Rock. What does that remind you of? I don't know. It was a lot of gossip, but that's why I remember laughing because I was just like, oh, kind of felt like, oh, don't worry. She's this and that. It'll be fine. The movie's going to come out and it'll be awesome. And everybody's had a bad experience with her. It was like that kind of call. So Stephanie Jones was basically talking mad shit about Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds to him, being like, don't worry about it. Nobody likes them anyways. They're terrible to everyone. It'll be fine. And then she went and conspired with Blake and her shell company to obtain their communications improperly through a fake lawsuit. Amazing. That's amazing. Let's see. They're talking to... he says he talked to Stephanie about the situation with the trainer, the comments about the pants being sexy, and just generally that, it was a very hard experience. Let's see. He says Stephanie responded by joking and describing generally the women and their fragility. Okay. Do you recall her providing any guidance to you around being more sensitive to the optics with a woman like Miss Lively who had just given birth with respect to the weight question or anything like that? Justin says, no, the opposite. She jumped right into putting Miss Lively down and talking about her reputation. That's awesome. Okay. Don't know about that. Yeah, I think we might be done here, guys. Hang on. Yeah, there's nothing else we really need to read too much. Because this stuff we went over in the beginning under the blue line there, so we're pretty much done here. All right. So that's gonna be it for this afternoon. I might be back tonight. I don't know. It'd be like 8:30 or something if I am, but I'll let you guys know for sure. Ashley McDaniel, thank you for the $5. Thanks for all you do, Lauren. I know it's not easy, but you're amazing. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm gonna take off, go back to work for a little bit, and then like I said, I might be back tonight. If not, it'll be tomorrow night. So, but that's all we got for now. I guess, like I said in the beginning, a lot of this stuff they're trying to attribute to him, I'm like, it's kind of like trying to call a Care Bear a Nazi. Like, it just doesn't really add up. All right. Well, that's all I got. So thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you later.